All right, I think people are in and I'll just start now. We can jump right into it. Sorry for the slight delay. We had a bit of technical issues that we were sorting out. But good afternoon, everyone. We are so happy that you are joining us today for our webinar. I'm Cleona Yong, a research executive at SSR. And you may be joining us on Zoom or maybe on Facebook Live or Facebook at a later date. But either way, we welcome you to our webinar today titled The Poverty Line, a global visual art research project on poverty and food choices. We are delighted to be hosting Chow and Lin here today. And they are the artist duo responsible for this large-scale, long-term project. And actually their book, which I think they will show later on, was recently featured by the New York Times as one of 5 recommended new visual reads. So that's pretty amazing. We also have with us Associate Professor of Social Work and SSR Steering Committee Chair, Prof. Irene Ng, with us to moderate the session today. So before I hand over my time to them, I'll just be making a few small announcements. A few small announcements. And I think this is a good time to pull out your phones because I'll be showing some QR codes. So as I said, today's webinar is being streamed on Facebook, and the webinar is also held as a part of SSR's monthly seminar series. So we mostly have webinars once a month, but this month in October, we actually have 2 seminars. This is our second. The previous one was 2 weeks ago. That was Working Hard but Still Working Poor. And this is because SSR does a lot of work and research focusing on or around poverty in Singapore. And 17th October is the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. So today's webinar is also in commemoration of that. So do follow us on Facebook and like us there because we do stream all of our webinars there, and we have a videos folder where we keep all of our past webinars. So today's webinar will also be uploaded there. And if you ever need to refer to it, you can head on there to check us out. And we are also on LinkedIn now, so do connect with us there. I'll also be sending the links on the chat, so no worries if you don't catch this now. And we have a mailing list where we send out all of our information as well. So we do have different channels, and we hope you stay in touch with us through those. So as I mentioned earlier, SSR holds monthly series, and we have now converted to online webinars where we hope to provide a platform for researchers and practitioners in the social service sector to share their ideas, their research and findings with the larger community. And we hope that providing this platform will spark some interesting discussions and perhaps even further collaboration opportunities. In the same vein, we also hope that this session will be one where you, the audience, can engage with the speakers. So we do have a Q&A portion at the end of this seminar. We'll be opening up the floor, so you can scan the QR code or enter SSR 27 OCT for October at pigeonhole.at. So we'll be taking in questions there. We look forward to engaging and lively discussion. Do also like the questions that you enjoy, because those will appear higher up for us on the list. And we do have a limited amount of time for taking in questions, so we are sorry if we do not have time during the session to address your questions. But I do want to say also before we start our webinar proper, that today's session is very special. It's a little bit different from our usual webinars. I think this is the first time we have had visual artists on as speakers in our seminar series. So it's our great honor to host both Chow and Lin. And it is exciting for us because I think it will also really allow us to explore how the arts or different media can be used in discussion about poverty. We know our usual audience are practitioners, social service professionals, academics, and researchers. So I think it will be interesting to kind of explore and discuss how art can really fit in with what the social sector tries to do in terms of maybe advocacy or awareness, and what kind of effects visual arts brings to the table. So I'm sure Chow and Lin will elaborate more on this later on, and we do look forward to your questions and discussions. And that is all from me for now. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I will pass my time to Chow and Lin. Let me get the slides up.
Thank you very much. It is a real honor, and we're humbled to be with you, invited by Prof. Irene and SSRC to present our work and discuss about how art can collaborate and share more about to raise awareness on topics like poverty and inequality. I know most of you are practitioners and academics, researchers, so very much in the field, very, very expert in this area. So we are really looking forward to also understanding your viewpoints and your insights in this area. So yes, I am Lin Hui Yi. This is
Stephen Chow.
Stephen Chow. So together we form Chow and Lin. That is our artistic practice name. And the project that we're sharing with you today is the Poverty Line. Next slide, please. So the Poverty Line, this project really arose from Stephen's time and being inspired by certain travels that he did.
Yeah, so there was a particular week where I was both in New York and Kolkata in India within the same frame of 7 days. And one would imagine when you go to New York, you think about Wall Street, you think about the glitz and the glamour. But what happened instead is when I was in New York, I couldn't help but notice that there were people begging on the streets just outside Wall Street. You have the homeless who would sleep inside the trains in the metro after hours, because that's one of the safer places that a homeless person can sleep after hours. Within a few days, I was in Kolkata, and what I saw was that the poor outnumbered everyone else. The poor were sleeping on the road itself at night because as the driver who was driving us from the airport down to the city told us, they couldn't sleep outside buildings because that's considered private property. So most of them end up sleeping inside parks or on the roads, which really led me to this question. Is it better to be poor in New York or Kolkata? Such a difficult question to answer then, but I discussed this at length with Hui Yi, and that really started our quest into this project.
Next slide, please. So when we, after at length of discussion with each other, we are also a married couple. So we do communicate a lot about issues that we are concerned about ourselves. So we really wanted to understand for ourselves, what does it mean to be poor? We ourselves are from Singapore. We moved to China, to Beijing in 2008, and we've been based here since for work and studies. And being in different environments, whether living, working, or traveling, we were very fortunate to also observe different communities and how people interact and the different social systems that different countries have. So we really wanted to understand from up what it means to be poor. And so what we did next slide please, was to do a lot of research. I myself, I'm actually an economist by training, and I also was a public servant. I worked in the Ministry of Trade and Industry before moving to China. And then after that, I did my MBA, and I've been doing market research since. For Stephen, he was trained in mechanical engineering, but he became a full-time mountaineer, and then later on did photography. So we come from very different disciplines. And when we looked into this area, we also brought together our different disciplines of understanding and methods. So for me, I started researching a lot into understanding the public policy concepts, the economic frameworks around the whole topic of poverty and how it is being measured. So these were some of the papers that I looked into. Next slide, please. And of course, the thing which immediately caught my attention was the definition by the World Bank, which is really a global extreme poverty line. But the thing which I was very intrigued by was how it is being updated every couple of years. And why was it updated, and what does it actually represent, which actually is really extreme poverty, which gives us a very international sense of what the poverty is across the globe, but that comes more from the perspective of international organization like the World Bank and may not necessarily apply to each and every country. Next slide, please. And one of the things, another thing which also captured me was then something which then looked a lot more interesting, which is how national poverty lines are also defined, but defined by countries themselves, by governments, depending on the level of development, depending on the social norms, depending on use, and of course, depending on the economic resources as well. And about the sense of, some countries, developing countries, especially using an absolute poverty line, which is more a minimum cost structure and a minimum sense of survivability, and versus many developed countries using a relative poverty line, which is more a sense of a social distance, which is a approach which the government then takes to consciously try to keep inequality down. Next slide, please. And one of the works that when we were looking from the visual perspective, we were also trying to understand, what are the ways that people usually portray poverty. And these are some of the examples that you'll see in in art, in photography, that it really usually portrays people in the human form, in the living conditions, and allows people to see it, but it really still extends as an outsider for many audiences. It's interesting to see people in poor living conditions, but it's very much from the perspective of being an outsider to such a situation. Next slide, please. So as we dug deeper into trying to form our own perspective of it, one piece of work which really inspired me, inspired us, was this book written by two professors, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo from MIT, who later won the Nobel Economics Prize. And they wrote a book called Poor Economics. And they did a lot of field research, especially in Southeast Asia, in India, and in Africa, about how poor people think and how communities are developed, and what are the decision-making processes taken by individuals and families and communities living in poverty. And one thing which we really reflected upon was the assumptions that people, we might have had before understanding the topic, which is that poor people, we assume them to only require the very basic minimum, and to only live within those very basic minimum because they have very limited resources. But what we found interesting from this research that they did is that just as much as us or any normal person, people living in poverty are also rational or irrational beings. Given a specific day where they may get a little bit more income, they may not necessarily want to buy more carbohydrates, more plain noodles, or more plain bread, which we may assume so. But really, it's aspirational that they might want to have better proteins, a bit of fish, some sweets as a treat for the children, because it's something they don't usually have, but they certainly see it around. And so we wanted to be able to bring this also to show the choices that poor people really have to make on a daily basis, going through that routine, but being very conscious that it's a day-by-day selection within a very restricted set of resources. So that was one of the things which really shaped our art approach. Next, please.
So what we did was that we wanted to create a work that combines our ability to look at food choices using the economics of defining what poverty is, and using a visual way to sort of combine all this together. So for the last 10 years, I started this project back in 2010. We started the first case study with China. And during then, this was the visual project that we came up with. Next slide. What we found is that in China, the poverty line then was 3.28 yuan, which is about 60 cents Singapore dollars. And when I first saw the amount, I actually asked Hui Yi, I said, wow, that's actually quite low because in context, Starbucks was already available in China, in Beijing then. And an Americano, which is a basic coffee, was already about 20 renminbi. So 3.28 yuan meant that you need about 7 days worth of poverty line budget to actually purchase one single coffee. And Hui Yi came back to me and said that this number was actually correct. So with that amount, we actually went to the local markets in China and we started buying food items. And each item that you see in this picture is at the same price, at the same value. So it's 3.28 yuan. So for that, you get 6 mantos or plain buns. Next slide. Oh, I think there's a slide before. Yeah. Or you get a bunch of vegetables, 小白菜, and then the next slide. Or you get one single chicken breast. I remember with 3.28 yuan, when we go to a chicken seller, we actually had to explain that we needed to buy a chicken part at this price. And it was actually through a bit of persuasion that the chicken seller was willing to sell this chicken breast for us and weigh it accordingly. And what we did with the photographs was we also photographed them on newspapers that we bought on the day itself within the city. During then, we felt this was a good way to show a sense of place and a sense of time because we were, after all, in China and we wanted to use something that was commonly available to anyone across the strata of a society, using food and newspapers to depict what poverty is and what food choices are available to a poor person in a single day. Initially, after we showed this to our friends, our contemporaries, we actually got a very mixed bag of reactions. We had our first group of friends who absolutely hated the work we were doing. They felt that we were trying to see poverty in a very disrespectful light. They felt that what we were doing was not true to journalistic standards. And we were actually quite taken aback by that reaction. But within days, we also saw people from the contemporary art field who felt this was a very powerful project that they really loved. And so instead of being very happy from this reaction, we actually felt quite confused. And at the same time, I don't think we felt that what we were setting out to do was an art project, but it certainly felt if art was a way to set out discourse around a topic which we think we know, perhaps this was a good starting point to get reactions that was both positive and negative surrounding one single body of work. So from there, we actually started doing this in other countries that we've gone to. Next slide, please. So we started collecting countries that we were visiting. So we started applying the same methodology in terms of defining the poverty line and going to the local markets to buy the food items.
Just want to explain here that for developing countries, we use the national poverty line and then we divide it into a per person per day, and we take that whole amount as a per person per day income of the poverty line. But then for developed countries, which usually use a relative poverty line, we actually use that amount and we multiply it by the typical proportion of a low-income household's expenditure on food and non-alcoholic beverages. So from there, we get the typical low-income household food budget. So that's a slight differentiation, but it kind of contextualizes it based on also how poverty is differently defined.
Mm-hmm. And then the next slide, please. And what we realized is then suddenly the choice of newspapers became a very important indicator of the various geographies of the countries that we've gone to. And also because of the rule that we use, the newspapers that we buy on the photo shoot itself. the newspapers also indicate a very specific sense of time. And this sense of time is not just seen from the date that you see usually on the upper corners of the newspapers, but they are also hinted through the politicians, the sports leaders, the icons of the day. So in this case, you can see that Sarkozy was having an article about him, and Sarkozy is the previous prime minister, the previous president of France, which indicates when this poverty line might be taken. Next slide, please.
So over the course of 10 years, starting from 2010 up to 2020, we covered 36 countries and territories across 6 continents.
Next one.
And the next slide, please. So the next section, we'd really like to share some of our key learnings that we personally gathered through this 10-year journey. Next slide, please. So one of the learnings that really also kind of fuel our passion into pushing this project further was that people really look at these items, look at these photos, these visual images with very interesting perspectives, and it connects with people, as Stefan said, across different social strata. A personal story that we'd like to share here was that when we did this project in India, I was staying at my company's apartment in New Delhi, and the apartment had a housekeeper, Arjun. And Arjun was a young boy, probably in his teens, and he had come from the village to work in the city, and so he worked as a housekeeper. Now, Arjun, when we got him to help in our project because we wanted somebody local who would bring us to the local markets and be able to select items and get prices that really a local would pay, not a tourist price that we would get. And when Arjun got to know about our project, after helping us, he was also very curious about what other countries we had covered, where else had we gone, and what did they look like. So when we told him that we went to different countries, including some countries in Europe, including Switzerland, he got really curious about Switzerland. And he asked, are there poor people in Switzerland? And next slide, please. And we said, yes, there are poor also in Switzerland. The definition is different from the definition of poverty in India, but there certainly are poor people in Switzerland. Next slide, please. So we showed him the Switzerland case study, which includes this photo here, which is of blackberry pies that we bought from the Migros supermarket. And when he saw this photo, this set of Switzerland photos, he was actually very intrigued, and he studied them very carefully. And later on, he told us actually, in his mind, Switzerland is always a land of beauty. It's where in the Bollywood movies, you have people dancing in the snow-capped mountains, and it's such a paradise. But when he saw the work that we did, and he got he was actually quite touched because he never imagined that there will be poor people in Switzerland. And for him, even though his income was not high, he felt that the people living in Switzerland also didn't have an easy time trying to make those kind of daily choices. So there was a kind of empathy that built up in him through looking at our works, and that perspective really touched us. And the next slide, please. One other key learning for us was the issue that it's not just about poverty, because poverty by definition itself could be absolute, could be relative. When we talk about relative poverty, very closely linked to the concept of poverty then is the concept of inequality and how it is measured and what does it impact. So, so for us, reflecting upon the issue of inequality actually became a very strong key learning, especially when we look at a country like the USA, where we could see back in 2011, when we went to New York and did this on the streets in New York, we went to visited supermarkets. We got a very strong sense that the level of inequality was high, and that was at the beginnings where there were murmurs of, later on, which led to the Wall Street protests. Later on, you see also the Yellow Vest movement happening in France, and various of these protests which were happening in developed countries. And so in these places, it's not the sense of absolute poverty, which is really getting people to go out and protest, but it's really the sense of inequality and the lack of opportunity to the progress of the economy, to the monetary wealth that is seen at people at the very high social status rungs. And it's this sense of inequality which could actually lead to social instability and political overturns, which is what we saw in the US with Trump and so on. So actually the inequality, just seeing from the food choices or from the sense of the ground sentiment actually can be a very strong issue as well that developed countries especially are facing. And another issue that we also recognize when we look, for example, at this US case study, is that for a lot of people who are living at low-income poverty levels, the access to nutritious food is also very limited. For a country like the US, which is very advanced, because of the way that their food industry is structured, whether in the F&B or in the retail supermarkets, poor people living in neighborhoods, going to normal supermarkets, not Whole Foods kind of supermarkets, do not necessarily get access to fresh and healthy, nutritious food. And a lot of these are really processed food, pizzas, hamburgers, processed cheese, Oreos, so on. These are the most readily available, and they are also cheaper, and they allow people to eat quick. But for example, the next slide, the irony is that in somewhere like India, then you would see that there are more fresh produce. Next slide, please. In India, there are actually more fresh produce which is available at the local markets, because that is also part of the food culture and it's also part of their local food infrastructure.
And then the next slide, please. When we went to Brazil, is this Brazil? Yes. So in Brazil, when we did our purchase of food as well, we did this in Rio de Janeiro. And so it's the biggest city in Brazil. And originally we wanted to buy this in the neighborhoods, in the favelas. However, we went to survey some of the shops in the favelas and realized that the shops are actually very small. They are kind of like your mini markets in Singapore. But from our own sense about the prices, it felt that the prices were very elevated and the choices were actually very poor. And so we started asking around and found that favelas are also governed by gangs within Brazil itself. So that could indicate why the shops there were not as good. And so what we did was we actually got a friend to drive us to a hypermarket, which is about half an hour drive. But we also noticed that you could take a bus from the center of town to one of these hypermarkets, but the bus fare alone is also 2.3 hias, which is the same price as the poverty line of a Brazilian living at that time. So what we realized is that one of this phenomenon where the market is not necessarily catered to the poor, because for the middle class and the rich, they are able to purchase food in bulk and in economies of scale and certainly at hypermarkets. But then what we also realize is the poor and the vulnerable very often would buy foods at more elevated prices and lower quality within their neighborhoods because the infrastructure or even the governmental support is not there. So in Brazil, this was one of the cases that we saw was a little bit more jarring that we imagined. And the next slide, please. So back in 2019, this was just before the pandemic, we actually went to 4 countries in Africa, to survey the poverty line as well. And Ethiopia was one of the countries that we had a very deep impression of. We realized that Ethiopia, just like China, has a controlled currency. Of course, you can say it very similar as Malaysia as well, where the currency is controlled. But what we found in Ethiopia itself is because the currency is controlled and the economy is not on the same level as China, import goods are extremely expensive. A block of butter was about $10 for a standard 250 gram butter. And even at the poverty line, we were only able to buy 4 eggs. And that was the closest thing we could find to be an animal-related product. We were not able to get any meat because in Ethiopia itself, if you want to buy chicken, you can only buy a whole live chicken. And that would cost quite a few dollars. And if you go to the supermarket, they only sell blocks of chicken frozen, at least in a minimum of 2 kilos and above. So we found that Ethiopia again also offer a very strong contrast of the very limited choices that poor people face in that country. Next slide, please.
So in the situation of COVID that we are in now, of course, we are also very much concerned because when we talk about poverty and people living in low income situations, that they are going to be more vulnerable even under a COVID situation because of lack of job security, access to the internet, homeschooling, and so on. And so all these resources and infrastructure deficiencies become even more pronounced in a situation of poverty, in the situation of COVID. And certainly, if you track it internationally, we are going to see an increase in extreme poverty and an increase in poverty happening over these 2 years with the COVID situation. So this is making us very concerned. Next slide, please. So coming to the situation of Singapore, I think most of our audience here are from Singapore. So Singapore is an interesting case because it doesn't have the official definition of poverty. Singapore has no official poverty line. So when we were actually doing the project, we took very long to think about it, about how we should address this issue. And we found a proxy, which is the Comcare Assistance Line, and that being the more official or commonly used, first, I guess one of the more widely applied assistance lines was the proxy that eventually we selected. And so this was part of the Singapore case study that we built up using a proxy of the Comcare Assistance Line. Next.
Next slide.
Yeah, so this is just a capture of the NTUC supermarket, but it's okay. Yeah, so markets and supermarkets are certainly where we go to shop product produce. Specifically in China itself, where we've been actually also doing a longitudinal study, we actually make sure that we go back to the same supermarkets and markets to buy the produce. So these are some shots of where we go to in Beijing. Next, please. And in China, what's interesting is that because we are also physically based here, so we have the opportunity to do a longitudinal study. And we have also observed that in countries like China and, for example, India and a lot of developing countries, there's a lot more changes on the ground which happens because one, the definition of poverty might change. In this case, it has, as you see, from 2010 to 2012, there was almost doubling of the poverty line definition in renminbi itself. The other thing is that inflation also changes on the ground. So in certain other countries like Nepal and Venezuela, for example, they would have really hyperinflation happening at certain periods of time. So in China, this was actually done over 10 years, 2010, 2012, 2016, and 20, where you see the amounts of mantou actually also changing. And it reflects changing food prices, also reflects a changing social economic situation and political attention to this issue. Next, please. Also, one of the things that we also accumulated about was that really after we started accumulating country case studies, it was interesting not just look at it from a country's perspective, but across countries. And that's when we started doing this kind of work. where, for example, we use this topic of eggs and we just look at it across all the countries that we've covered. And we can see what is the availability of eggs, what is the affordability of eggs, what variety of chickens are being used as layer hens to produce the eggs. So we started seeing these kind of patterns and trends coming up, which really tell us the story of a global food production, trading, and processing ecosystem. Next, please. So the last section we'd like to talk about is about how we've been building up our audience and collaborators over these 10 plus years of working on art projects. Next, please.
This is an exhibition that we did in Paris back in 2015. It's part of the Les Nuits Photography Festival. And so what we did was we actually printed the prints life size, and we put them in a room like this. So, and one of the things that we like to do is actually we want to put the work above eye level. So people actually have to tilt up their heads to actually look at it, because we often feel that poverty is an overwhelming subject. And when you see them in a physical way, it actually overwhelms you. And when you start zooming into every one of them, they represent food choices. And because they are life size, you feel like you are looking at newspapers at the same time. So people end up reading the headlines and the newspaper contents, and of course, looking at the food itself, which actually look lifelike. Next slide, please. This was at the Central Academy of Fine Art Museum, which is one of the top contemporary art museums in China, in Beijing. So this is a 100-meter long installation that we did, representing 17 Asian countries and territories. Next slide, please. Just this past summer, we had a show in France, in southern France, in Arles. And so in this case, we actually printed the prints very big. So they are almost bigger than a human being. It's about 1.7 meters tall. That's taller than me. So we put them as a statement as well, because we also felt that with the pandemic, things have gotten into sharper focus, especially with people who are vulnerable. Next slide, please. So I think one of the biggest rewards we have gotten from this was that our work is not just limited to photography festivals. I think right from the start, we have also found audience in the mainstream media, in the academic field, and we are also very heartened to get very diverse coverage from different media outlets over the years. And next. And I think, and then of course, we have always dreamt about going to the United Nations, but I think that the whole episode, or how we actually got there, is almost through a butterfly effect. We were actually showing our work at a art festival in Penang. And one of the officers of United Nations was actually on vacation, saw our work, spoke to us, and then a few months later invited us to actually show at the United Nations SCAP in Bangkok itself. It's the headquarters for Asia Pacific. And so we actually presented 2 rounds to the United Nations, once in 2018 with our Poverty Line series. And then we were invited a year later in 2019 to showcase our work again. And this time, Hui also managed to give a private tour to ex-General Secretary Ban Ki-moon about our work. Next, please.
And actually, you see the work that we're showing to ex-Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is the same work here. You see a very familiar face, Professor Irene. She was part of our panel discussion when we opened this work, this exhibition on this work, equivalent scans at Objective Center for Photography and Film in Singapore in 2017. So we really enjoyed this panel discussion that we had, which was really an interdisciplinary panel. From besides the 2 of us, we invited researchers, academics, people who are very well versed in the arts, in the social sector, and in communications, and we really had a very good discussion about how these issues can really be, in this case, it was about inequality, and how the issue could be further discussed in a wider social context. Next slide, please. Then we were also very incidentally, we were also approached to have our work to be on the cover of the book of Sir Anthony Atkinson, who is known as the father of measuring inequality and poverty around the world. And when we were approached by Princeton University Press, we didn't really know how we were found, but they wanted to use our photos. And in the book itself, they also mentioned that the work actually is a contemporary way of visualizing poverty, which is a very different way from how economists traditionally talk about it. Next, please. That was actually the first time that we were on a book. And later on, actually in 2019, we won a Book Dummy Award at the Arles Photography Festival, which was in France, and we were then awarded this prize by the Luma Foundation and the Arles organizers. And basically, we submitted our draft for this book on the poverty line, which contains work from our project over the years, and we got the support under the prize to then publish this book and make it real. So now this book is available. Cleona, if you could click. Okay. And so besides the photos itself, we really wanted the book to be more in depth into providing understanding insights from experts in the field of economics, public policy, international development about poverty and inequality. And so actually we have these experts to contribute their insights and perspectives and knowledge on these areas. Next, please. And this book, we are also very grateful, fortunate that it has also gone on, and it's becoming a new platform for us. And for example, it's sold at the Nobel Peace Center in Oslo, and it was featured on the New York Times. Next, please. And of course, in Singapore, it's sold by DEC, who are the people behind the Singapore International Photography Festival. Next, please.
This book is also in some of these very eminent economists' hands. Professor Esther Duflo, which Hui actually referenced very early at the start of our work, she actually have the book in her hand as well, and along with Nobel laureate Professor Angus Deaton. So I think we are very heartened that economists have also saw our work as one of the contributors to the conversation surrounding inequality and poverty today.
Next slide, please.
So 2 years ago, we were actually invited by the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. They were actually curating the Singapore Summit Young Societal Leaders Forum then, which was headed by ex-Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong. And so the discussion that we were given was, can art save the world? And honestly, I would say no. I think what can save the world is good policies, is good measures, is good humanity. Art is merely a conversation starter. But I also told Hui, I said, if we went in and say no, then there's no point in getting us in. So I think instead, we reframe the discussion to how artists and art is part of what makes the culture that we have today. Is what makes our contemporary discussion about compassion, about humanity, about what we care about. And I think what we wanted to do right from the start was to answer a question that we found very wanting. And we wanted to use art and we wanted to use the role of research in answering that question as earnestly as we could. So we are never quite comfortable labeling ourselves as artists because we didn't feel that our work is that creative. It's actually very based much on fact and observation and documentation. But at the same time, if art is the label that's put on us and this advances the conversation surrounding this topic, then perhaps we would just move the needle slightly. Next one. So thank you very much. I think that's the end of our presentation right now.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hui Yi and Stephen. What a visual feast, pun intended. I think it's the first time we've had a presentation with so much visual, so much so that I think that was why we had technical difficulties, right? With
Yes.
difficulty to advance the slides, right? And not have them lag because each one is so high resolution. Yep. There are actually quite interesting questions in the pigeonhole already, and I encourage participants to keep rolling them in. I will start by one observation first, and then maybe we'll go on to questions about methods, because I think people are very curious about methods, and then about the application as well. Yeah, so we'll end with application. I think what strikes me about what you've shared is poverty is contextual, and you've tried to bring that out with the way you have depicted those food against the backdrop of the newspapers of the day. Right? And indeed, first, needs in different contexts are different. Right. And also when you brought in the concept of inequality in the context where it's high inequality, even if most people are rich, actually the small proportion who are poor feel it even more acutely. Right. So it's not the case where, like we say, oh, Singapore is so rich, so poverty is not a problem as compared to our Asian neighbors where poverty rates are higher. Right. But someone who is poor in Singapore might feel it even more. Right.
Yes.
So on this basis of context, in the pigeonhole, I see a couple of questions on this. One, which I find really a very good question, and you can address is, the question says, yeah, it keeps moving. I wonder where it is. It's about, in a big country, such as USA and India, where there are different ethnic groups and cultures for access to foods. How do you portray this or deal with these differences? And maybe you can also answer that along with another question that was asking about, if you're in a context where you can say grow your own food and forage, right? How is that different from buying, right? Because your art is based on buying from the market.
Okay. So one thing is we know we do not go really in depth into each individual countries, and in large countries where there are many cities, there's rural versus urban, so on. We have not been able to do that kind of in-depth breakdown within the country. But that is kind of a limitation of our own ability to cover. But it's also a kind of eventually it was also a concerted approach that we developed so that we could then do more across country case studies. Within countries, certainly we do know that there are differences in communities. What we do is that one, we specify which city that we were in. Within the city, we do try to go to a few different spots to get different newspapers, to get different food items, especially if we know that there are different ethnic groups, and we want to reflect that. But we may not touch places outside of that city which are not very not so common within that city. So that's what we try to do. So that would be
decision about which city, maybe like the capital, the one that is
usually it is the capital or the second, third largest city within the country.
We usually go for a populous city, like for example, if we were to use, let's say, Australia as an example, Canberra is the capital, but it's not a populous city by any measure. So, so for us, whether we did it in Sydney or Melbourne, we felt it would have been a good indicator of the country's resources. And also, one thing we also realize is when we do this in the bigger cities, we also realize that the congregation of the poor is actually visible. So whether you're talking about Tokyo, where we saw homeless people just sleeping outside Tokyo stations at night, and in the morning they pack up their belongings neatly and they kind of disappear for the day. Or in New York, we find that the bigger cities actually do attract poor, and we, in our own research, we also realized that the poor go to bigger cities only also because there are also more opportunities for work and for income in these places.
And your second question, sorry, yes.
Yeah, go ahead first.
Yeah, and I wanted to reply to the second question about what if people grow their own food or forage. So yes, we do know, and especially that's the difference between urban and rural or farming communities and poverty situations. But one interesting thing that we also realized is that maybe for raw foods, raw ingredients, the ability to farm them yourself may affect that you don't have to go to the market and purchase it using money, but you have to use money to purchase services. But one thing is that processed food actually costs pretty much the same whether you are living in the rural area or in the urban city. So if you're getting a packet of instant noodles, which is a certain brand, not necessarily the most premium noodles, but even a cheap instant noodles, is going to cost the same amount of money being distributed in a retail store in the countryside versus a city, or it may even be more expensive because of the last mile logistics that's needed to reach the rural countryside. And it is not unavailable, but it is processed food and other groceries are also being purchased by people living in the countryside. So we do know there are going to be differences, but so therefore for us, we actually assemble a food basket which has processed and raw foods, which has carbohydrates, proteins, fruits and vegetables, and snacks. And so it becomes more of a food basket composition rather than zooming in on one or two particular foods.
Great, thanks for explaining that. All right, now the question that I'll read out is something that is what our Singapore audience would like to know. How did you derive the figure of 233 from the ComCare assistance?
Yes, so that was back in when we did the Singapore poverty lines. That was 2013. I believe it was about 800 Singapore dollars for ComCare assistance line. And then we got the
right per household member.
Yes, and then we also got the understanding of I think it was the lowest quintile household expenditure on food and non-alcoholic beverage, and then we multiplied that. Yeah, so usually for developed countries it's about 15 to 25%. I think in Singapore's case was more towards 20-ish%. Yeah, and that's how we calculated that.
Right, and you calculate it on a per day basis.
Yes, correct, on a per day basis.
Right, yeah. Okay, one more methodological question, and it's more personal. What are the challenges you've experienced doing this project?
Budget. We basically self-fund this project by ourselves over the last 10 years. And obviously it involves a lot of travel, it involves a lot of time. And I think that was actually one of the major challenge because we had no sponsors, but we felt very strongly about this project. And it's also through a stroke of fortune that it was at the same time that my photography career actually picked up. So I was actually sent to various countries to do commercial projects. And it was through those commercial projects, I also had to convince my clients that they give me time to set apart some time to do this project. So I would say that's probably one of the bigger challenges. And I would say for the first 6 to 8 years of this project, we felt that it would have reached a peak in terms of its media coverage and so on. And I think it was really doing this book and also winning the awards and then getting ourselves into bigger exhibitions and platforms, and including the United Nations, that we really felt that the work has gone on to another level. So it certainly wasn't a project that we envision rewards or fame or let's say money right at the end of it. In fact, I think the challenge was that we felt this was meaningful, and we agreed among the two of us that this was meaningful enough to do, even if we did not have the critical audience to see this. So I think in the end, it was very much a labor of love, but I think we also had enough motivation to carry forth with this work.
Great, thank you. Thank you for doing this work. And I think that's a good transition point into questions regarding the impact of the project. But I will ask first the most highly voted question. What
Yes.
one can afford versus what one chooses to buy and eat are different. You show what people can buy, but this might not transfer to what their diets are. Do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
Yes, this is certainly our beginning kind of spark to say that we should not assume what people should eat, or that assume that we know what people do eat. Certainly also people living in poverty, living at low incomes, different people depending on their ethnicity, depending on their locality, may also choose different diets and their access to food. So I think it became a very complex issue that we felt we are not in the expertise of people doing the field work for many years to really be able to portray this issue well. And so our method was really to assemble a food basket of choices. So we kind of, turn the question around to then, as viewers, as audiences of the work, what do we assume poor people's choices to be? And our assumptions correct, or our assumptions also starting at the point of our own backgrounds and our own perspectives. How can we then get to understand their decisions better?
Yeah, I think maybe just to add to the point is that when we talk about people who's living at the poverty line, I think the assumption is that choices on a daily basis becomes very cyclical. Their incomes may not be stable over time. It may come up and down, or they may have a lot of dependents under them. So choices becomes very limited. But let's say if we were to show them a basket of goods, and if we point to them, what have you actually tasted over time, we will probably get a large proportion of them saying that, they have eaten some of this simpler carbohydrate much more often than other foods. But I think a lot of the foods that we chose can be comparatively more expensive than the simple carbohydrates, but they are not vastly more expensive. So we are talking about proteins and maybe some processed foods, desserts, compared to grains and rice or noodles. But very often when we choose the food items, we are also quite careful to show that these are still food items that you can find in almost any supermarket. And so there are very little luxury items, but they are also seen as necessary. Like, for example, when we were doing the poverty line in Hong Kong, we find that certain herbal supplements in the form of seahorses, or even a turtle soup, is actually seen as rather essential if someone is to become sick. And so we actually verified, we went to talk to the locals to see how often they actually consume this. And so on a normal day, simple carbohydrates could be fine, but if the occasion calls for it, then you may have to pay more just to access the higher price, the higher choices of foods available.
Thanks for the clarification. If I may guess what the intention behind this question, and the person who asked this question, if you would like to verbalize for yourself, please do let us know. Yeah, and we can let you ask. So I guess for like a person, an audience member, when I look at those pictures, it's a bit hard, right? There's a few steps before I can link what I see visually to what I think is like a sufficient diet for a person, right? Based on what you eat in a day or in a meal. Yeah. So that translation is a few steps removed, and maybe we're wondering, could there be a more direct way to depict this? So yeah, if the person wants to clarify, you can. But we should jump also into now the impact questions. I think there are a few of that. Maybe we can talk more generally first about the impact to the general public, people who have visited your exhibits, listened to your talks, have had reactions been?
I think the reactions have been very positive, and it really varies from audience to audience. I remember we did our first physical installation in Beijing, and it was a pretty big installation. And I think a week later, we actually got an email from someone who was working in the EU, in the European Commission, and he brought his son along, and he explained the work to the son. And they ended up spending 4 hours looking at our exhibit because the son had a lot of questions and he started answering them. And so he felt compelled to send us an email to tell us how powerful this was. And we have met a lot of audience who came up to me personally to say how guilty they feel, because when they look at the pictures, they knew what the choices of these people were, and they knew what choices they themselves have for that day, the meals that they fast over. And so they knew what they had compared to what people in the photos depicted, where the gap was. We got very good reception when we showed in Thessaloniki, the second biggest city in Greece, just about 2 years ago. Greece was actually undergoing very difficult economic sanctions and structural changes. So when they saw the work, they immediately gravitated towards what we are trying to say and what we're trying to do. I didn't really even have to explain the project. They actually understood because they knew that when it comes to limitation of choices, it's either this or that. It's a harsh reality, but the harsh reality differs from country to country. So I think overall, when we show the work, sometimes our work is shown alongside other works that had that wasn't necessarily talking about poverty. So sometimes we miss some of these crowds, but I think most of the people who saw the artist statement, who knew what we were talking about, actually felt very strongly after they examined what we're trying to say. And of course, one of our most powerful experiences was actually showing at the United Nations, because we ended up talking to senior officials, ministers from, I think it was 30 different countries. And a lot of people came up to us. They recognized the figures were taken from their departments, and they disputed some of those figures. But I think overall, the feedback that we got was that they felt that this was an interesting way to showcase their work in a creative light. So I think the feedback from the audience has always been one of our motivations, because we knew what reaction this was spurring on.
If I may add, then, well, in your decision about where to exhibit and the placement of those exhibitions, how have you evolved? You know, like when you've shared about being in a museum, it sounds, if you want to be critical about it, it sounds like, oh, maybe it's just a sexy thing. It's like, oh, how novel an idea, you know, then they place it there and then people maybe just walk past it. Oh, okay, interesting, and you go. And then now you talk about having gone to UN and actually being able to talk to ministers about it. I mean, is there a decision about where and how to place the exhibits?
I think right from the start, we decided that we would like to climb up the art ladder as high as possible. And I think this was quite a clear decision, joint decision at the start, because if we look at how art is positioned today, it's considered a very contemporary topic. Artists have very good platforms to speak from, and they could speak about almost anything from internal feelings or feminism or some of the newer contemporary topics out there. So we felt that poverty was rarely taken as a platform taken by artists. And so I think for us, we have to win some, and then for some, we see where the leeway is. So I think for a lot of the museum shows that we're involved in, really do understand that when we are selected for the work, the curators, the directors of the museums themselves actually strongly believe in our work. And the audience they attract is a variety of audience. We admit that. So not everyone comes to the museum feeling like they want to be educated. Some want to be entertained. And we see that as well. But I think for us is that everywhere where we show the work, it's actually displayed in a very clear way of what we're trying to say and what the work is trying to evoke. So I think using the platform of art for us has been a rather effective way, because it also allows us to also go to United Nations, because I remember when we were speaking to them, the leaders were also impressed that the work was previously shown in different museums and biennales. And so they felt that this was a work that they were also willing to dedicate resources to showing it within their space. So I think for us I think right from the start, our motivation is quite clear. Our agenda is we want to use our work as a catalyst concerning the conversation of poverty. I don't think we profess ourselves to be experts, even though we've been on the ground in so many countries. But certainly, I think when it comes to the definition of poverty and how to alleviate it, I don't think we are the ones providing solutions, but I think we are certainly the ones provoking reactions and also questions surrounding this topic. And we feel that perhaps art is one of the many ways to do that.
Right. And during your presentation, you said, can it save the world? No, but it's a conversation starter, right? And
Yes.
with that, we need to answer this question. Where is it? What would, okay, yeah, I think this is the one. Do share how you think this research and art installation contribute and benefit those amongst us who are struggling financially and with lack of food. So we talked about the impact on the general public, but this crowd we have here today, right, are social service professionals or people who might be, right, struggling financially ourselves. So
I think with this work, I think the thing that we wanted to build is a sense of empathy, that connecting people from the basics of knowing how much a certain food fills us or doesn't. Knowing whether a banana looks good, whether an egg or two is enough for a day. So I think it's this sense of building of empathy that we're trying to also cultivate in our audience, and using that as a connection point to start people thinking about our community around us. So it's not something very far away. It's even though we do it as a global project, but it really starts with understanding our and reflecting upon the people we see around us in our own communities. So I think that's what we want to build. And so I wouldn't be able to say, specifically, I can do much for an individual who is living at the poverty line, who is living in very low income situations. I do certainly want story to be heard. I do certainly want for more voices to be able to come out and be able to connect to people and for others to understand and for that sense of community to be built.
Yeah, and I think certainly, this is also a way to perhaps use art to advance on the topics that are really concerning. Because I think when we set out about doing this project, and now that we have gotten quite a bit of momentum, we realized that even within art schools itself, a lot of institutions that we knew later were actually using our example as a way of collaborative approach, because it is between an economist and a photographer looking at poverty as a topic. So within MFA programs, and we actually got a lot of random emails from different lecturers in different countries, and they have always referred us as one of the one of the examples of how this kind of cross-disciplinary collaborative approach have led to a project that is known but done in an artistic context. So I profess that our work is not critical in the sense that it creates a critical injection into people who are in need, but certainly it does contribute to the culture and the conversation going forward. And we have also since started teaching workshops to MFA, to artist practitioners on how to do this. And perhaps even, for a lot of the practitioners today, who are also representatives of NGOs, our advice is also, I think art is actually a very powerful way to showcase a project, because I think the communication means have also changed. In this last 10 years, TikTok wasn't around, Snapchat wasn't around. Social media has also changed vastly in terms of how communication is. So I think for us, even though we are artists, we also foresee how communication has changed and how to stay relevant in today's times. So it's not easy to do it, but do it with an artist, or rather do it with a young artist. You'll find that conveying some of these ideas with urgency, with relevancy, could actually benefit your organization in some ways.
Yeah, as a poverty researcher, I really can see how your approach can reach audiences that my kind of work cannot reach, right? And that's the power of collaboration too. And I really see how you all have evolved in collaborating with different mediums, different people, having workshops, having talks and installation, now the book, right? And I guess it's an important message that we're not thinking that we'll use this to solve all problems. At the same time, I think this audience being many social workers who work with people on the ground, one very important principle is that we reflect the voices of the people whom we are reflecting. So it's quite powerful to always check in and get that voice from them and say, really, does this represent you? Yeah. So I remind myself that to always check in. And I do my own, when I do my research, I actually interview low income individuals myself, so that I don't lose touch with really their voice, their faces there, right? Yeah. So that balance, right? But congratulations on getting this far, right? So we have 10 more minutes, and I'd like to invite people who have questions to let us know, so that you can ask the questions yourself. Kamalini from Geography Department has a question on the artistic process. Can I invite you to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Okay.
Yes,
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for that. That was really amazing. I think what's interesting is that your approach to taking the photos, you're thinking like a social scientist, but then the representation and the way it's captured, right? The politics of representation, that's where the creative value and really the power of your work can be seen, right? So I guess for me, the question would be, can you tell us a little bit about the photography, the process, right? So this is, I guess, more for Stephen, maybe about, given that your line of work is you do take photographs, right, for different purposes. So in this particular project, right, how was the process different, right? What did you have to give up as a photographer to take these photographs, right? Do they reflect you as an artist? That's my first question. And the second is about the arrangement. So if you look at the museum and how you arrange the photographs in those museums, you have so many photographs. How do you decide which ones go there? Does it matter where the city is that you're exhibiting the story about the poverty line in terms of what gets placed next to each other and how those things are organized? So I guess the second question comes from me as a geographer thinking about spaces, and the first is about you as a photographer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamalini. So for the first question, for the photos, when we set this out in 2010, I think we actually referred to different visual typologies. Typologies is basically the studying of type. And so we actually set out to do something that was rather different from what we were used to doing. Because when we were doing poverty line in China, we were very tempted to photograph the streets of Beijing. We were also very tempted to photograph the markets that we were in. But instead, we dive in on a very peculiar angle, which is to place the food devoid of packaging on top of the newspapers. And we were very disciplined with making sure that the measurements were consistent throughout the 10 years. So the measurement of the newspaper is the same. The distance of the camera from the food is the same. From a technical standpoint, I actually used 3 different studio lights to light it so that the lighting is uniform. So this was actually taken in a very disciplined manner. Is because it's kind of based on visual typologies that we have seen previous artists do it, but never in such a close context. They were photographing landscapes, but then they had very strict rules on how they photograph the landscapes. For example, it has to be a cloudless day. It has to be from a certain distance. And so we felt that those kind of work really appeals to us because it's not about the individual picture. It is after you have done multiples, after you have done enough work, that the visual typology sort of starts surfacing into a sort of nature look. So I think it's what we have built over 10 years. And I think this was a very early decision that we made that turned out to be quite compelling, both for art practitioners, art curators today, along with academics that we have spoken to. For the second question, I think we are, the way we did it is also in a very modular way. And I think at the beginning with the exhibitions that we were doing, very often it would be due to the geography of the place. For example, when we did the show in Penang in Malaysia as part of an artistic festival, we knew that the country that they are most interested in is their own, which is Malaysia. But at the same time, we also knew that they will be interested in their neighboring countries. So we put Singapore and Thailand side by side. So if you go into a wall, you see the Malaysian poverty line flanked by Singapore and Thailand. And then there is another room that you go into, and then that's where you go further. You go and see a country in Europe. You go and see a country from Africa, and then you see a country from South America. Because I think for us, knowing yourself is always most interesting, and then you will proceed to know others. So, and I think it is with later exhibitions that we also started toying with the visual types, like for example, the common foods. So you have the eggs from 36 different countries, or you have meats, or even we found that the best-selling biscuit in the world is the Oreo. It is as well distributed as a food item as Coca-Cola. It's just that you don't notice it. As we travel around the world, we realize that instant noodles are found every single place, but the same brand is often not found. No one single brand has a monopoly over the instant noodle market. But we realize for biscuits, Oreo is almost always available. And then when we did our research, then we found that yes, Oreo is actually one of the most successful biscuits today, with a history of almost a century old.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well, Cleona has signaled to me that we're out of time. So that leads me to thank Chow and Lin, right, for your labor of love, for the intentionality behind doing this. That it's not just a piece of art, but it's a piece of, continued art that has a very important social message. And as you expand the work and you collaborate across with different people, may it be used to amplify the message on behalf of the poor. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we have one request? Can we take a group photo with everyone if you turn on your cameras?
Wow, I'm not sure whether the audience will do that, but we can try.
Please.
You see, the photographer needs to do this.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
No, this is actually very
Wonderful
touching
to
for
see
us. So
all
we hope you got something out of this. Okay, I'm just gonna take a screenshot. Thank you so much. Hold on. Waiting for some of you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Quite a lot to go through.
Yeah, 4 pages. Wait. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone.
All right, back to you, Cleona.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining and staying with us for the little extra Q&A portion. Yeah, we hope you enjoyed today's seminar, and thanks so much. I think Irene summarized it beautifully, to Chow and Lin for joining us today and sharing your labor of love and your work with us. And big thank you to Irene for moderating today's session, for asking the questions, some of which were, I guess, tougher, and but yeah, summarizing them as well. So I just have a few announcements before we go. Let me just share my screen. Yeah, and also a few links to send in the chat. So I also have a poll. Sorry, this is a lot of things at once, but if you could help us do the poll, which we have at the end of every session, that would be great for us. While you're doing the poll, I will just do some announcements. So as I said earlier, today's webinar, along with all other webinars that we host, are stored on our Facebook page in the videos folder. So if you ever want to refer back or check out our past webinars, or send this over to a friend or colleague if they would be interested, then you can go ahead and check us out on Facebook and go to the videos folder. So that's where all of our webinars are stored. Yeah, on top of that, just an announcement for the next webinar that we're hosting on November 10th. This is the registration link, so you may scan it on your phones. The QR code is here, and the tiny URL is here. It's tinyurl.com/SSR10NOV, NOV for November. yeah, so we will be having the Touch Community Services team, Stella, Jennifer, and Deborah, along with Kwan Jin Yao, who is a PhD candidate at UCLA and also a postdoc fellow at University of Denver. So they will be sharing their findings and recommendations from their mixed methods research on the relationship between social capital of low-income single-parent families, as well as parental, adolescent, and familial well-being in Singapore. Yeah, so look forward to another engaging and lively discussion. I hope to see a lot of you there. You may also share the links, which we will have been posting on our different websites, so on LinkedIn and on our EDM as well. I'll just leave a few of this up while people do the polls. And that's all for today's session. So big thank you to Chow and Lin and Irene and for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll just leave this on while people stream out, but feel free to leave whenever you're done. Oh, some people, okay, I'm going to open up the chat. Some people are saying thank you for sharing your work.
Yes.
Thank you. No, it is indeed a great honor and humbling for us, because we do know a lot of you are really working in the field and on alleviating poverty, working with low-income individuals and households. So we do hope that for us, we think your work is very meaningful, and we are inspired by the work that you do, and we hope that our project spreads the message and awareness. So thank you very much.
All right, feel free, Chow and Lin, also to take your leave whenever. But yeah, I think there's some messages coming in. I would appreciate.
Yes, don't worry, we will stay on for a while.
Okay.